Hey guys, we're here at the shop again. Today, it's time to start baiting the worms out of the finished compost. It's starting to dry out a little bit, and there's still quite a bit of worms in here. And other than a couple of little pieces of scraps that I just threw in here whenever I was cleaning up the other day, the stuff is really clean and ready to be removed. One thing I'm going to have some trouble with is there is a lot of eggs in here. I had made the mistake of using tap water early on. This is my first year doing worms, and I started doing worms in May, and I used rainwater for the first several months and had a lot of egg production. Things went well, and then I moved the worms close to the sink, and I got a little lazy, and I started using regular tap water. And then I noticed that my egg production just stopped altogether. So I switched back to rainwater, and now the worm production, or the egg production rather, is way up. So this batch is going to have a lot of eggs in it. So that's something I'm going to have to be aware of whenever I store this material. I'm going to want to store it in a way that will stay moist so that the eggs can go ahead and hatch. And then before putting it in the garden in the springtime, or reselling it, or whatever I choose to do with it, I will have to get the baby worms out. So that's what I'll have to do with the eggs. Now this is not an egg, this is a little big for an egg. This is an okra seed. We'll smash it, that way they can eat it. Typically, the okra seeds, I threw this moth in here the other day to see if the worms would eat him because he was dead. And so I put him in here, and the worms haven't touched him. So we'll throw him down there. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to bait these worms out of here. Now I've had really good luck with the littler bait system. I use the other bucket and set it in there. It's got holes in the bottom, and they come up and go into there. And they've done way better job this time than last time of going into the big bucket. Almost all of them are in there. There's probably just several hundred still in here. And so we're going to make us a little bait can. And the way I do it is I let the material, yeah, my sink's really gross. I use it for a lot of dirt cleaning. But I let this material dry up quite a bit, and then I use moisture to bait them out. Instead of trying to use food to bait them out, I use moisture. But I do use food as well. But I think it's my opinion that the moisture baits them out better than the food does. So I always put a wet paper towel in the bottom, and that gives the worms a bed once they get in there. If you just put the fruit in there, they don't really have anything to hold on to, nothing to keep them in there once the food's gone. So by having the paper towel in there, that gives them a little bed and some place to go whenever they get into the bait cup. I will also put in just a couple pieces of frozen material. And I always like to use the frozen stuff in my bait cup because then you don't have to wait so long. If you use a fresh cucumber it'll usually take 2 or 3 days for it to get to the decomposition state that the worms will start to eat it. And then it goes real quick. But by using frozen, um, you don't have that wait time. Something about freezing the vegetables busts up the cells and makes it to where it starts to decompose right away. So that's the base for my bake cup, and then we'll put one more wet paper towel. It's important not to wet these in the sink. So here's what I do now that it's cold. I brought my fishes in here instead of out in the tank, and I'll just wet that right there with the fishes using the fish water. We'll dump that out in the nasty sink, and then we'll just cover that up right there like so. Come on, shake it out a little bit so it covers everything up. And this is my bake cup. Now, I have had extraordinary success with this style of bake cup. I've seen a lot of other videos with a lot of different styles of bake cups, and they get some worms, but by the end of the deal, it don't seem like they're getting all the worms. And the last time I did this, I sifted through all the material by hand. I didn't use a sifter, and I only found 2 or 3 worms by the time I was ready after just 1 week of baiting. But now here's the biggest secret, is you have to empty the worms out of the bake cup every single day. Empty what you got and then rebait it. And if you wait a week, like I see some people that will wait a week or 2 weeks or however long, and they do get quite a bit in the bake cup in that time, but they still never get all the worms baited out. And if you're removing them every day, putting them in the other worm bin, which all mine are just going to go right in here into the feeding bin, which is being worked into proper castings, and that's where they're all going to end up anyway. So I just put them in there, and then once I clean this material out, all this material gets dumped right back into this empty bucket, and then I start my new bin back down in that bucket. So they're all going to end up in the same place. Since I don't do multiple buckets other than just the 2, that all the worms are going to the same place anyway. So it's important to take this bake cup, empty it every day. Since this is at my shop, when I come to work every day, first thing I do is I just come check on the worms. I'll pull that bake cup up, dump it into the other deal, rebait it, put it back in here, and then the next day I'll pull them out. And the first 3 or 4 days I'm getting full cups of worms, and then getting to toward the end of the week, it gets less and less and less. But if I'm pulling a full cup out on day 1, then if I was to leave that in there for a week, how could I get any more than the full cup? The cup's full. So that's why I have to dump it every single day, because that's the only way to get them all. Once the cup's full, the cup's full. So by dumping it every day, I can fill that cup several times and get all the worms. Instead of just getting 1 cup full of worms, I get 3 cupfuls of worms plus 2 partial cups full of worms. So that's why it's so important to empty that cup every single day to maximize your baiting process. Now I'm kind of new to this, but I've only baited 1 time. I filmed the time that I did empty out my castings and everything, but my process seemed to work really good. I was really impressed with it. So there's probably even room to improve on this method. Like I say, I'm pretty new to this, but I've watched a lot of videos and seen things that I thought could be improved upon on other people's methods. And that's how I came up with mine. Now this material is still a little damp. You can see how it sticks together. This is damper than what I would prefer to use as, you know, moisture as my bait. But we're going to give it a try anyway, because I do got a little food in there. So here's hoping that this will dry up a little more in the next few days. For some reason it's drying out real slow this time. I don't really know why. Last time it dried out real quickly. I've had the top bent off for, geez, 2 weeks now, and this is still pretty moist. So we'll see if the bait cups will even work when it's this moist. But so that's how I bait. Let's take a look at the other bins while we're here. My frozen cucumbers for my bait system, I threw these out of the top bucket down here, so we'll get those into the bucket. I made this lid just the other day. It fits down in here just perfect. The reason I did that was because my paper kept getting tore up or whatever, and I'd put something else down on top, and I noticed that whenever I had something a little heavier on top, the worms went crazy underneath, and they all came up to the top of the surface and just, did a really good job on that top surface. And whenever I pulled it up, the worms were all up on top, and they hadn't been doing that with the paper coverings. So I cut that lid there that fits perfectly down in the bucket, and then whenever I would pull the paper back, all the worms would be up here. I mean, I just did this a little bit ago, so most of them went back down. I stirred everything up a little bit, so these are just what has come back up in the last 10 minutes of this video. But yeah, so by having that heavier lid down right on the surface, the worms really come up to the top and clean all the garbage that I got up on top. And they make quick work of the paper layer that I put down. I've ended up having to replace this paper layer about every week because they just go right through it when I have that heavier lid on there. So this bin's doing pretty good. It's not near finished compost yet. And if you remember, when I started this bin, it was all paper, just paper, just shredded paper. And they have since turned it all to dirt. And like I said, I did add maybe 1.5 gallons of stuff that my tomatoes were growing in, and I mixed it in with the paper, and it still was basically, it seemed like it was mostly paper once I did that. But these guys have worked through it pretty quickly and got it turned to dirt, all that paper. I will probably add another gallon of paper, mix it up before dumping it in here once I clean this, because this still has a lot of work left to be done to it before it's turned to finished castings. I don't really, that stuff that I put in from the tomato, it was kind of a peat mossy type material, and it's just, it takes a lot to get worked through, I think. There was a lot of roots in it from the tomatoes, and so it just feels kind of, I mean, it feels pretty good right now, but whenever I first did it, it just felt kind of spongy, and you could tell that they're really going to have to work through it for a while. And I got some ochres in here, and that really takes a long time for them to work through the ochres. I guess I just got them in here as like a snack food, but I did just load them up with a great big old cucumber. It looks like a squash because it's all yellow, but I've had it sitting on the shelf for a month, and so it's starting to decay on its own. So no freezer for that one, just all natural decay. So they're going to really like that cucumber. Well, I guess that's it for this bin. I'll try to cover them back up here a little bit, whatever I can do with one hand. And then we'll put this lid back on there. My suggestion is for everybody to put one of these lids on there. It does hold the moisture in. If you're wanting to dry out your bin, you're going to have to leave it off. But while your worms are working through the material, a little bit of a heavy lid, not heavy, this is only a half inch siding board, but you know, I'd push it down. It fits tight enough to where I can push it down and put a certain amount of pressure down on the top soil, on the top of the soil rather, and I don't know, I just push it down to where it's just sitting on the surface, and I don't know, it's just very interesting how just having that weight on the surface of the dirt, how the worms behave. Well, if you remember, I put 200 worms in this little container to start the process on this paper, because I know we're going to be needing it soon. And you can see that it's getting dark. The 200 worms are still alive and kicking in here, and the paper is starting to get dark. You can see a lot of castings mixed in. 200 worms isn't very many worms to have all this paper to try to work through, but they're working it. You can tell by the color change that it's getting darker, which means they're going through and eating it and making some castings throughout it. So it'll already have a good start whenever I dump it into the new bin. That'll be a good base to start them in. So probably another week or so. We'll see how quick I can get those worms baited out of the other box, and this thing will be ready to be dumped into its new bin. I'll leave that open a little bit more. Get this piece of wood right here, and we'll just stick it in to hold that door open. Okay, so that's the bins. A quick update for this week, and I'll keep you posted how the bait process goes. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.